The Unhallowed Voyages of Captain Thorne, a Nautical Heresy. Forget the ghostly echo of the Flying Dutchman and the charming rogue of the pirate's tale. 200 years ago, the Atlantic was ruled by a terror more real, more calculating, and infinitely more bewildering than any phantom, Captain Elias Thorne, who navigated by the stars and the unholy whispers of the dead. Part 1. The Sovereign of Salt and Madness. The year was 1827. The port of Salem, Massachusetts, stank of salt-cured cod, exotic spices from the East Indies, and the raw ambition of a young republic intent on mastering the seas. It was a time when a captain's word was law, his ship a floating kingdom, and his mind, sometimes, a private asylum. Among the clipper captains who made Salem the powerhouse of American trade, none was as whispered about, feared, or successful as Captain Elias Thorne. The man was a navigational genius, a relentless profiteer, and, by all accounts that reached ashore, clinically unhinged. His ship was the Lamentation, a fast, black-hulled brigantine, infamous for two things, its impossible speed and its vanishing crewmen. Elias Thorne did not merely captain a vessel, he performed a daily heresy upon the waves. He was a tall man, skeletal thin, with a face permanently etched by salt spray, and a pair of unsettling pale blue eyes that seemed to look through the physical world, fixing on geometries and fortunes invisible to others. He never slept below deck, preferring a hammock strung near the main mast, where he could lecture the rigging and the ocean on the failures of mankind. He did not eat a single vegetable, subsisting entirely on preserved meats, hardtack, and copious amounts of Jamaican rum, which he called the sacred oil of clarity. His legend began not with a hurricane or a mutiny, but with a ledger. The Fact, the Ledger of the Damned. In the age of sail, meticulous record-keeping was mandatory. A ship's log documented latitude, longitude, weather, and cargo. Captain Thorne's logbooks, however, were legendary in the Salem Custom House for their unorthodox entries. They were written in an immaculate copperplate hand, yet interspersed throughout the nautical data were cryptic, sprawling notes that gave the impression of a mind simultaneously brilliant and shattered. For instance, the entry for May 14th, 1826, a day the Lamentation was recorded as having outrun a British revenue cutter off the coast of Cuba, read, 11 a.m., latitude 23 degrees north, longitude 80 degrees west, course south-southeast, wind fair, a 4-knot breeze. The king's curs gave up the hunt. The Lord knows I have no quarrel with His Majesty's coin, only with His Majesty's utter lack of vision. The first mate asks for a chronometer reading. I refer him to the alignment of the Pleiades and the whisper of the water spirit below the keel. He remains obstinate. Obstinacy is a symptom of excessive gravity. I shall instruct him to jump into the sea for a moment. It will restore his natural buoyancy. The first mate, Mr. Silas Ketch, would later be hospitalized in Philadelphia with a broken leg sustained in a fall that he could only describe as a playful shove from the captain's god. The Cargo and the Thorne Theorem. Thorne's success was rooted in his ability to predict market fluctuations with impossible accuracy. He never followed prevailing trade routes. If everyone was hauling tea from Canton, Thorne was hauling opium from Calcutta. If the New York markets were glutted with cotton, Thorne arrived with a full hold of Brazilian coffee beans. His profits were consistently 30 to 40% higher than his competitors. His secret, he claimed, was not economic insight, but celestial cartography. Thorne believed that the precise moment of a cargo's acquisition dictated its market value at the time of sale. The stars, he argued, did not merely control the tides, they governed terrestrial commerce. He would often delay sailing, sometimes for weeks, waiting for a specific planetary conjunction he called the confluence of the greedy twins. During these delays, he would sit in his cabin, surrounded by ancient maps and astrological charts, chanting softly, while his bewildered crew swabbed the decks. On one famous voyage to the Pacific, Thorne was becalmed for 19 days in the doldrums, the sun baking the very resin out of the deck. His second mate, a rational, God-fearing man named Thomas Bell, finally confronted him, pointing out that their water stores were dwindling and they were sitting atop a vast fortune of rotting silk. Thorne, without looking up from an almanac scribbled without chemical symbols, replied in a tone of serene condescension, "Mr. Bell, you measure life in moments. I measure it in eons. That silk is not rotting. It is simply waiting for the proper stellar benediction. When the moon crosses the house of the weaver, and the third planet coughs twice, the wind will return, and that silk will be worth its weight in gold in the feverish markets of Lima. Until then, you will conserve your panic, and I will conserve the ship's destiny."
3 days later, a squall appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, propelling the Lamentation at a speed that nearly tore the sails. They arrived in Lima weeks late, just as a sudden political upheaval had blockaded the usual sea routes, driving the price of imported silk to unprecedented heights. Thorne's profit was astronomical. The crew was paid a bonus, but they were more terrified than enriched. The insanity of discipline. Thorne's control over his crew bordered on psychological warfare. He maintained perfect discipline not through brute force, though he was capable of it, but through a chilling, unpredictable theatricality. He banned all personal items of any color besides black, white, and gray. A sailor caught with a red bandana was forced to wear it tied around his ankle for a week, an object of ridicule and a superstitious danger. He outlawed whistling, believing it summoned air elementals that would steal the ship's momentum. Instead, he insisted that the men sing operatic arias while working the rigging, claiming that the high notes appeased the spirits of the deep. It was a bizarre, echoing chorus of Italian tragedy sung by grizzled, illiterate Yankee sailors. But the real terror lay in the trial by water. If a crewman committed a serious offense, say stealing rum or sleeping on watch, Thorne did not flog him. Flogging, he declared, was too linear a punishment. Instead, he would sentence the man to the trial by water. The condemned man would be lashed to a small, overturned dinghy and towed behind the Lamentation for exactly 12 hours, from sunset to sunrise. The man was not left to drown. He was left alone, in the dark, with the enormous black hull looming above him, and the chilling knowledge that his fate rested entirely on Thorne's whims and the strength of a single rope. Many men who survived the experience never returned to sea. The sheer, isolating terror of the night, coupled with the captain's unsettling gaze as he ordered the towing, broke their minds more surely than any whip.
the antagonist of God. The one man who stood in direct, quiet opposition to Thorne was Reverend Dr. Alistair Finch, a retired missionary and natural philosopher who, having lost his own ship in a tragic grounding, had been hired by the Salem shipping magnate, Mr. Ezra Vance, to sail with Thorne as the vessel's supercargo, the representative in charge of the freight and finance. Vance believed Finch's grounding in logic and piety might act as a ballast against Thorne's volatility. Finch, a man of rigid Enlightenment-era rationalism, viewed Thorne as a medical specimen, a magnificent mind corrupted by a spectacular case of what he termed nautical melancholia, a psychosis brought on by isolation and the hubris of command. Finch kept his own secret journal, a purely factual counterpoint to Thorne's fantastical logbook. The first entry set the stage for their 2-year confrontation. August 1, 1827. Aboard the Lamentation. The captain, a man named Elias Thorne, is an anomaly. His genius in navigation is undeniable, but his behavior is a defiance of every established principle of science and theology. He insists the ship is not propelled by wind on canvas, but by the harmonious vibrations of the departed. He ordered the carpenter to carve a hollow space in the main mast to deposit a dead bird, claiming it would lighten the ship's spiritual burden. I am here to account for the cargo, but I believe I must also account for the captain's soul. God help us both. The real story of Captain Elias Thorne is the 2-year collision between these two men, the mad genius who bent the sea to his will through superstition, and the rationalist who sought to cure him with pure, unadulterated fact, all while sailing on the deadliest, most profitable ship in the American fleet. The journey they were about to embark on was a 2-year global odyssey to the farthest reaches of the globe, a voyage that would test the very boundary between sanity and superstition, profit and perdition.